Hello, and thank you for taking the time to watch my presentation entitled Capturing the Elusive Sound of the Bassoon on Your Own, Applying Recording Studio Concepts for Personal Use. In this presentation, I hope to demystify the often difficult task of recording a good sound on the bassoon. This approach is aimed at recording yourself on your own, either at home or at school, but these concepts can be applied to any location or recording situation. I will also be discussing reasons why recording the bassoon is so difficult and what oftentimes common approaches should be avoided to find a better sound. Having the most expensive equipment does not automatically give you the best sound. The most important things are the space you record in and the setup you use. You can make a far superior recording using more readily available equipment on your own than the best engineer with the highest quality microphones and processors if their approach is wrong. Hopefully, after this presentation, you will have more of an understanding and be ready to record a great bassoon sound yourself. What are some common uses for a self-made recording? You could use it for self-improvement. This is assessing your own playing or your own interpretations. This could be recording yourself practicing in real time and then listening back to it as a way to help learn what you could be doing better or what mistakes you could be making and not realizing it. You could use it to promote yourself to the public, whether this is via Facebook or YouTube video or posting things to SoundCloud. Any way you want to make something to put out there for the people. Or you could be using it for the promotion of others, highlighting music that is newly discovered or new to you, or that's just important to you or that you enjoy. You're playing this music because you want to, or you're playing it because you want to show something new and exciting that you found. Or, and what could probably be most importantly, especially to students or young professionals like myself, is to record yourself to send to jobs or festivals or academic programs. Any way that helps you advance yourself educationally or professionally. And also, when sending recordings on which you'll be evaluated, you don't want to put out something that could give someone any reason to start critiquing you on anything other than your playing. So by sending a recording that has a great bassoon sound, you're already putting yourself a step ahead. What is the desired sound for a bassoon recording? Whether it's recorded in a hall, a studio, or even in your living room, a good recording should be a good representation of a public performance or recital in a high-quality acoustic environment. So even if you're not recording in Carnegie Hall, it should still sound to your listener like they're sitting in the room with you while you're performing. And you're not going to be performing for people in a closet or in a bathroom, so it shouldn't sound like that. To the listener, it should sound like they are in the best seat in the hall that the theoretical performance would be taking place in. You don't want to feel like you're in the back, where all the sound is washed together without any clarity, nor should you feel like you're sitting right on the stage with your ears pressed up against the instrument. What are the desired traits of an ideal performance space? You want a space that is resonant and enhances the overall sound of the instrument. You want it to be acoustically satisfactory so that you don't lose clarity in the bassoon sound or the sounds of the other collaborating musicians. You want there to be a balance between presence and clarity, and you want the resonance to blend the sound of the entire instrument as well as the entire ensemble together. Here is an example of a good sounding, high quality professional recording. And along with the audio for all the listening examples that I'll be providing is a spectral analysis. This gives a way to visualize the sound you're hearing. Each of the little spikes, like you see there on the graph, represents a frequency in the sound. So what you're seeing is the fundamental pitch plus all the different overtones in the sound. Left to right on the graph corresponds with low frequencies to high frequencies. The lowest note on the bassoon is B flat 1, which is about 58 Hertz, and with each octave the frequency doubles. The top of our range, around E5, is about 660 Hertz. All the information you see above that is overtones and other sounds. Let's have a listen. Notice how you can hear the space of the room. The sound is full and it's even from register to register. There's a nice warmth to the low end. And here we have an example of a recorded bassoon sound in a studio that isn't quite up to the same standards. Notice how the sound feels squashed. It's very dry. There's not a lot of space. The sound is not quite as full. You're not hearing as broad a range of the color of the instrument. And if you were to be sitting in the room with that performer, it would not sound to you live as it does coming over the sound of that recording. So what are the inherent difficulties of recording the bassoon? Well, first off, you can see just by the size of it, the bassoon is much larger than the rest of the woodwind family, and the sound emanates from all over the instrument, not just one fixed point. Also, the tone holes are on both sides, front and back, as well as covering the entire length of the instrument, top to bottom. Also, it's just not as common of an instrument, so there's less general knowledge and familiarity amongst engineers on standard ways to record the bassoon. And then we see frequently the recommendations on how to record the bassoon are usually grouped together with the rest of the woodwinds, but due to the reasons I just mentioned, it doesn't necessarily work the same way, and you won't get the same quality of sound if you record a bassoon the same way you would record an oboe or a flute. Here we see the sound radiation patterns for the bassoon, as Jürgen Meyer describes in his book, Acoustics in the Performance of Music. This diagram is very useful for seeing what sounds and colors come from where on the bassoon, and why some mic placements work better than others. In the top left is an example for the 300 Hz range, which would be the low and mid registers of the bassoon. This we can see radiates out from the front and back of the instrument along its axis, but does not come out of the bell. This would be where a lot of the warmth of the bassoon sound comes from. Next, we have the 500 Hz range, which would represent our tenor and high registers. Here we see the sound starting to shoot more in an upward direction, but again, not from the bell. And we can see if we place a mic too low, you would lose a lot of these frequencies. In the 1000 hertz range is where we have a lot of our overtones, and the sound field is narrowing, but also shooting both up and out, as well as down towards the floor. But you see, there's a large space right in front of the player where these frequencies miss. Placing a mic in this space would lose the color from these overtones. On the bottom two pictures, the 2000 and 5000 hertz ranges, we see the sound shooting more straight up in the air. These frequencies are what add the harshness and brightness to the sound, as well as a nasal quality that you'll hear in the upcoming examples. To capture the warmth of the bassoon, you wouldn't want an abundance of these sounds in the mix. Seeing these patterns shows us that in order to get the most accurate color of the bassoon sound, we need to place the mics in a space that would capture as much of these different frequency ranges as possible. Here are a couple examples of instructions for bassoon recording from major audio manufacturers. First, we have the company Shure. In their microphone techniques for recording, first off, they say oboe, bassoon, etc., which, as I mentioned before, is a common problem where the bassoon is lumped in with the rest of the instruments when it should not be. And it recommends that the mic be a foot from the sound holes for a natural sound, or that's well balanced, or you can place it a few inches from the bell for a bright sound that minimizes feedback and leakage. As you'll see in the upcoming examples, I try and emulate similar techniques to these, which do not create the same effects that they are implying. And then from the very high-end microphone maker DPA, in their How to Mic a Bassoon, they say, close or spot miking a bassoon is very similar to that of a soprano saxophone, clarinet, and oboe. Aim the mic at the fingering holes a third of the length up from the bell at a distance of 15 to 20 centimeters. So this is similar to with the Shure, as they're grouping us with the rest of the woodwinds. But first off, you don't want to be up from the bell because the bassoon bell is already at the top of the instrument. I think they meant that it would be down from the bell. And also 15 to 20 centimeters is just not far enough away to get a well-blended sound. And lastly, we have an example from high-end manufacturer Audio-Technica, who made a YouTube video on how to record the different woodwinds. And the audio from this is actually what I used in the undesirable recording from earlier in the presentation. And here in the video you can see the mic they used and where it's positioned, and they also, as you will hear, explain where it is.
Like other woodwinds, the bell only tells part of the story. Here we have an AT-4047 large condenser, 24 inches out and 48 inches off the floor.
Let's go over some microphone basics. A microphone uses a small membrane-like surface called a diaphragm that vibrates back and forth when exposed to sound. This movement is captured and amplified, which then becomes our recorded sound. There are three main types of microphones, and their differences stem from the differences in the diaphragm. First, we have dynamic microphones. These mics have a heavier diaphragm that requires more energy to move, making it better for recording loud sound sources, such as amps for guitars or basses, percussion instruments, drum sets, vocals, brass instruments. They're often found for recording live sound. These mics are generally a lot more rugged and can take a lot of abuse without breaking, and are less expensive. You can get real top-of-the-line dynamic microphones for just a few $100s. Here's an example of a very popular and common Shure SM58 microphone. Next, we have condenser microphones that use a lighter diaphragm, which makes them better for recording acoustic sounds because it does not take as much energy to move the diaphragm, so they capture more of a broad sound picture. So that makes them great for studio vocals, woodwinds, acoustic guitar, orchestras. There are two types of condenser microphones. We have large diaphragm condensers, like this U87, which are often seen being used to record singers in a recording studio, or for recording instruments like strings or woodwinds. And then we also have small diaphragm microphones, or pencil microphones, and they are often seen recording orchestras or wind ensembles. They are often found in pairs and are great for recording large fields of sound, like stages, and they're great for room sound. Our third category is the ribbon microphone, which uses a thin corrugated aluminum ribbon instead of a diaphragm and this helps create a warmer sound. And it's great for instruments and especially great for brass. The technology for making ribbon microphones, like this old RCA mic, is much older, and it was what was used in the very first microphones. They're often very expensive, up into the thousands of dollars, but their warm sound is still very sought after. You can often see these on the desks of talk show hosts. Different microphones record in different polar patterns. This represents how strongly they pick up sound coming from different directions. First, we have omnidirectional mics, which, like human ears, pick up sound equally from all directions. Some mics, like all ribbon microphones, record in a bidirectional or figure-8 pattern. They record sound equally from in front and behind the mic, but reject sound coming from the sides. Then we have cardioid microphones, which are created by combining omni and figure-8 diaphragms together. These mics are more sensitive to sounds in front of them, but reject sound coming from behind them, as you can see in this diagram. What are the benefits of using a Zoom recorder? The mics on a Zoom H4n, which is what I used, or a similar recording device, are usually two small diaphragm condenser cardioid microphones. And this is similar to what you would see over a recital or performance hall stage. The mics on the Zoom are in an XY pattern, which means they're at 90 degrees, pointing in two different directions. And this helps to create a stereo sound. And this is similar to the small diaphragm pencil condenser microphones that you usually see in a hall. A Zoom can either be used as a standalone recorder using a SD card, or it can be plugged into a computer via the USB port and be used as an audio interface, where you can use the onboard mics, or you can use its XLR inputs or line inputs to either plug in other or more mics, or to plug in things like electric guitar or a synthesizer. And also, they're relatively inexpensive for the quality of the features, like the preamp and all the onboard settings that you get with the device. Why use a Zoom recorder over a phone? Well, the audio recording on a phone usually utilizes a feature called auto gain, where the mic input level is constantly being adjusted based on the volume of the sound source that it's detecting. And this is similar to if you were listening to a symphony in a car going down the highway with a lot of wind noise and road noise. And you would constantly be having to adjust the volume to be able to hear the soft spots and the loud sections at an equally comfortable level. A moment that stands out to me doing this is if I were listening to the third movement of Mahler's First Symphony, because of course I want to hear the bassoon solo at the end of the movement. So I crank up the volume so that I can listen to it and enjoy it. But then there's an immediate, almost attacca entrance of everyone playing super loud in the beginning of the fourth movement, and I have to, if I don't remember to turn the volume down before it comes, I hurt the ears of everyone's in the car and risk damage to my speakers. And with this auto gain, the more instruments that are being recorded with the greater dynamic range, the more noticeable it is. So in an upcoming example where I do record with the phone, it doesn't fluctuate much, if at all, because the sound source is relatively consistent. So there is possibly a slight adjustment right at the beginning, but then it pretty much levels out for the rest of the recording. Also, the mic on a phone is much smaller and is not able to accurately pick up the same depth of sound as the mics on a Zoom recorder or something similar. And all microphones would put out a sound that's too quiet to hear on its own. So they need some sort of preamplification to make the sound at an audible level. And the preamp on a phone, as you might imagine, like the microphone, is also very tiny and is crammed in with a bunch of other electronics on the inside of a phone, which color the sound in ways that aren't natural or accurate. Things to avoid in a bassoon recording. Uncharacteristic sound. You want to make sure that the sound is blended amongst all of the registers. You don't want the high notes or the low notes sticking out more, and you want an accurate color. You want it to sound as if you were hearing the bassoon in the same room. You want to avoid the nasal sound that can sometimes happen if the mic is placed too close or above the bell. You also don't want to hear too much extraneous noise, such as mouth noises or tongue noises as it hits the reed, or just leaking air from either the mouth or the air coming out of the tone holes. These are things that you could hear in the undesirable audio recording from earlier, with the mic being at that close distance from the instrument. You also don't want to hear any buzzing from the reed that you wouldn't hear ordinarily. You also want to avoid artificial sounding enhancements, such as reverb. And this is especially important if it's audio that's going to be with a video, because you don't want to see a video of a bassoon player in a relatively small space and then have the audio sound like it was recorded in a giant church. Common mic placement pitfalls. We could have the mic too close to the instrument. This could lead to an unbalanced presence through different registers, with some notes sounding fuller than others, or some registers sounding fuller than others. It could also lead to noise from the keys, or you can hear the air through the tone holes. And as we saw in the diagrams from earlier, having the mic too close to the instrument leads us to not being able to capture the full range of colors and frequencies that shoot from all over the instrument. It also leads to an unblended sound. If someone were to listen to a recording of a mic that's too close, it would not sound the same as if they were to listen to the person playing as they were recording it in the same room. If the mic is too close to or pointing down the bell, we get a false sound. We get that woody or nasally sound from, as we saw in the diagrams, from the super high frequencies being too concentrated. If the mic is too low, we get an unblended sound and too much key noise and air through the tone holes. This is similar to having the mic too close to the instrument. And if the mic is pointed at the vocal or the mouth, we get too much noise from the reed, like the buzziness, and we also get too much mouth noise, like the tongue hitting the reed, air escaping, and this also just leads to not capturing the full sound. So when choosing a space in either your house or in your school to make your own recording, you want to choose a space that is as large as you can. So like your living room or a nice sized classroom. Because if you're in a smaller space like a closet or a bedroom, and especially a bathroom, you can get a lot of reverberations from all the close by walls, the sound bouncing off all the walls that are close together and creating like an echo chamber almost. And you get a lot of unwanted noise, and it adds color to the recording that's not accurate. And this could also produce, if you hit resonant frequencies of the rooms, where some notes really just fill up the sound a lot more than others, that will come across in the recording, and you'll have very ringing notes compared to the notes around it. Also, a larger space helps create a more natural sound in the acoustic. It won't sound like you're recording in a closet, because you don't want to be. You want to be emulating the sound of a hall or close to it. So you need to have more space in the sound. You want to, if it isn't already there, use carpeting or rugs to help dampen the extra reverberations from the floor for a cleaner sound. Again, cutting back on extraneous reverberations throughout the surfaces. And you want a space that is quiet. So close windows and turn off any noisy electronics or appliances that could add unwanted noise to your recording and be distracting, because our brain and our ears naturally filter out some constant sounds to focus on things that we're more actively doing, but microphones don't have that same capability and will pick up those buzzings or wind noise that you might not be normally hearing otherwise. So here we will start listening to the different Zoom placements I've chosen. I tried to pick placements that would have made sense to maybe an engineer or to someone without a whole lot of knowledge trying to set up what they thought might work best, rather than do a bunch of different Zoom placements that I know would not make much sense and sound not very good. For this first placement, as you can see in the pictures, I placed the mic pretty close to me, 26 inches off the ground, 18 inches from the instrument, and I set the recording level on the Zoom to 50 since it was going to be pretty close to me. I have it aimed between my two hands, and it's on my right hand side. This would be what a lot of the manufacturers would refer to as their general woodwind setup. So let's take a listen to it. Already you can hear that the sound is not quite as full. And you can hear the Because it's close and pointed at only a few holes on the front of the instrument, some notes sound more present and filled out than others, even when they're close to each other in the scale. Notice how the low notes sound far away. And looking at the spectral analysis, you can see a sort of shape like this that's pretty flat. And this is just showing us that there's a lot of frequency information, but what we would prefer in the shape of the frequencies overall is more of a steep triangle like this. And we'll see this in more of this shape in some of the upcoming examples. So with this setup, the sound is somewhat false, with not all the registers blending together or sounding equally. There's also a lot of extraneous noise. The key clicks are more prominent, and you can hear the air coming through the tone holes. For the second placement, I have the mic set up 48 inches off the ground, so about head height, quite a bit taller, and 38 inches from the instrument. Because it's a little farther away, I set the recording level to 60. It's also not aimed straight forward, but down a little bit, more towards the bottom of the vocal. It's on my left-hand side this time, as opposed to in the first setup where it was really close on my right side. And I found that recording more on the side of the long joint, or the bass joint, gives more of the natural sound that you're looking for. So let's take a listen to this. So, although there's already a clear difference in sound, it's a more complete sound, it still seems too close. There's not enough space. And here, as opposed to the first placement, we're getting a little too much present in the low notes. And although we do see more of this shape in the overall spectrum, as we get lower, you can see it starting to flatten out. And that's due to more high frequency information from the mic being close to the bell. So while this one is a decent overall sound and much better than the first placement, it's still a little too close, and it doesn't allow all the frequencies to blend together as it would to a listener sitting in the same room. This would be a good mic for close miking, or if you needed some isolation from other instruments if you're recording more than one instrument. But if it's for just bassoon and piano, or bassoon by itself, you would prefer a little bit more distance between the mic and the bassoon. In this third placement, the mic is quite a bit higher. It's about 68 inches off the ground and 24 inches from the bell. I kept the recording level at 60, but the mic is now aimed down, not quite at the bell, but further down, more towards my hands. It's also, rather than being to either side, it's more right in the center of the instrument. And this is a setup that you often see in recital halls, where you have the mics for the room hanging over the stage. And sometimes if they're too close to the stage, or the performer is standing too close to the front of the stage, then you can have the mics like this pointed more down towards the bell. Let's listen. And you might be able to hear there's a little bit more of a nasal quality to this setup. And that's from the mic being placed looking down into the bell, so you're getting that high frequency information. This can cause the spectral graph to look a little bit more like this, where it sort of flattens out and it's not as much of an even triangle. That's because there's more, that's showing that more high frequency information. And also, like the last setup, because it's close to and looking down the bell, you get a lot more presence in the low notes, more than you normally would hear. And this produces that nasal sound, the high frequencies, which is not really so natural of a color. For this fourth placement, I have the zoom set up 57 inches off the ground and quite a bit further away at 64 inches from the bell. I set the recording level to 65, but it could probably, due to the increased distance, be turned up more to maybe around 70. And also, rather than pointing straight forward at the instrument, it's pointed actually down pretty far towards the boot joint at the bottom. And this is to see more of the instrument. And if you think back to the Meyer diagrams, this would hopefully capture more of those different frequency pie slices. The setup is also off-center towards my left hand, again, like in the second placement, so that it is a little more on the side of the long joint. And let's listen. We have more of a natural sound here, and there's also more space due to the distance. And you can see even in the low notes, the shape of the spectral graph is still in that steep triangle. There's still warmth to the low notes without them sounding too close or sounding far away. And this is my preferred setup. It provides the space you need for the sound to really start blending together and develop, but not too far away that the bassoon sounds far away. So for this last example, I kept the setup the same distances away, the same height, but I used my iPhone XR, instead of the Zoom. And this is to give a comparison of if you were to use your phone as opposed to an actual recording device. So this even sounds a little bit farther away than the Zoom. And you can still see a little bit of that extra high frequency information. So while it's not quite as clean sounding as the Zoom, this placement still gets a pretty decent sound. And so if you don't have access to a Zoom recorder or something similar to that, or if you want to make videos on your phone, also using video, if you were to like post on Facebook, using your phone is not a bad alternative as long as it's treated with the same considerations as a recording device. But as you heard, sounds a little bit farther away, so maybe you would want to get a little bit closer. And it is difficult to really hear the differences as much after listening to several excerpts of one placement and then getting used to it, and then listening to several excerpts of another. So I made a little compilation of just a short bit from each mic so you can have more of a picture of how they sound side by side. here's my preferred setup. And here is the iPhone recording. So, if you're not planning on submitting your newly made recording for a job or position or festival where they prohibit editing, you could, if you wanted, add some reverb to help the sound more like it was actually recorded in a hall. But this has to be done, you don't want to add too much because then it'll sound unrealistic, but if you do it tastefully, it can add a level of warmth and goodness to it. So the reverb helps give it more of that feeling of space and helps also to blend the sound together. And this would actually help it be more comparable to our good sounding recording from earlier, which the more astute listeners might have recognized as my own teacher, Frank Morelli, performing one of the Mignone waltzes. So, thank you for watching. I hope that the presentation has been helpful for anyone trying to create the best recorded bassoon sound that they can on their own. And of course, everyone's recording spaces and equipment are going to be a little bit different, but this should hopefully point you in the right direction for things you want to avoid and why, and more towards a better general location to start placing your recording devices to help get that better sound. So thank you again, stay safe, and happy bassooning or recording.